The dust devils danced across the sun-baked earth, swirling grit and forgotten whispers. One name, though, the wind seemed to keen with a particular sorrow. Niyol. It was a sound of profound grief, almost swallowed by the vast, uncaring silence of the canyon lands. There, Hasteen, a warrior of the Dene, knelt. His powerful frame, usually so straight and unyielding, was bowed. Sacred paint streaked across his high cheekbones, now mingled with the harsh dust and the undeniable track of a single slow tear. It cut a path through the grime, a river of sorrow on a face carved from stone and ancient resolve. Beneath him lay his Mustang, Niyol, windrunner, still and silent, a dark stain spreading into the parched ground. The men who had done this, a band of nameless, hard-eyed riders, they had laughed as they rode away. They believed they had simply killed a horse, silenced a lone Navajo. They were wrong, fatally wrong. They hadn't just stolen the breath from a magnificent creature. They had stirred a tempest. They had awakened a fury as old as the crimson mesas that watched, impassive, and as enduring as the stars that would soon glitter in the cold desert night. A fury that no man among them would survive. Hasteen and Niyol had been two parts of a single spirit, etched into the rugged tapestry of the territory. For seasons uncounted, they had moved as one. Niyol's hooves knew the hidden trails, the whispering aspen groves, the sun-scorched flats where heat shimmered like water. Hasteen's eyes, dark and deep, missed nothing. The faintest track in the sand, the distant shimmer of heat haze that spoke of riders, the subtle shift in the wind that carried the scent of rain or danger. Their life was one of quiet communion with the land. Hasteen lived by the old ways, his days governed by the sun and the seasons. His small hogan, nestled in a hidden cleft of rock, was a sanctuary of tradition. The smoke from his carefully tended fire carried prayers to the holy people. But the world was changing, pressing in. Sometimes necessity drew him towards the burgeoning settlement of Stoneford, a raw collection of clapboard buildings and hopeful, fearful eyes huddled by the banks of the aptly named Stony Creek. There he would trade fine beaver pelts or potent herbs gathered from the high places for the few things the white man's world offered that he could not make or find. A little flour, some coffee, perhaps a strong steel knife. He spoke little in Stoneford. His quietness was a cloak, his gaze steady and observant. Men noted the way he moved, with a coiled grace that hinted at a strength deliberately held in check. Old scars, pale lines against his sun-darkened skin, told silent stories of a past not all peaceful. The townsfolk mostly kept their distance, some with respect, some with suspicion. The rougher sort, the drifters and prospectors who haunted the dim interior of the town's only saloon, the dusty spur, sometimes cast covetous glances at Niyol, tethered patiently outside. The Mustang was a creature of breathtaking beauty and spirit. His coat, the color of a desert night, his eyes intelligent and bold. Hasteen felt those gazes, the casual greed, the flickers of ill intent. He met them with a stillness that gave nothing away, but beneath the surface a familiar vigilance hummed. Peace was his desire, but the instincts of a warrior, honed by trials unseen by these town dwellers, never truly slept. He saw the tension in the set of a jaw, the way a hand lingered near a holstered pistol. Stoneford, for all its striving, was a place where peace was a fragile thing. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun beat down relentlessly on the dusty main street of Stoneford, a new shadow fell across the town. Marcus Flint and his gang rode in, not with the boisterous arrival of cowboys fresh off a cattle drive, but with a chilling quiet that was far more menacing. There were 5 of them, hard men with faces like worn leather and eyes that had seen too much violence and inflicted more. Flint, their leader, was a tall man with a scar that pulled one side of his mouth into a permanent sneer. He rode a big, raw-boned roan, and his silver-chased saddle glinted with an air of stolen prosperity. Their reputation, like a foul wind, had preceded them. Tales of raided homesteads, stagecoaches plundered, and a ruthlessness that left no room for mercy. Stoneford held its breath. Shopkeepers peered nervously from behind dusty windows. The usual cacophony of the blacksmith's hammer and the saloon's tinny piano seemed to falter, then die. Hasteen was concluding a trade with Old Man Peterson at the mercantile, exchanging a bundle of carefully dried medicinal roots for a small sack of coffee beans. As he stepped out onto the boardwalk, Niyol, tethered nearby, shifted, his ears pricking forward. Hasteen's gaze followed, settling on Flint and his men as they dismounted with slow deliberation in front of the dusty spur. Flint's eyes, cold as river stones, swept over the street, dismissing the shuttered windows and fearful glances. Then, they landed on Niyol. A flicker of something, appreciation, then open avarice, crossed his scarred face. He nudged the man beside him, a hulking brute with a broken nose named Gus. "Now that's a horse," Flint drawled, his voice carrying in the sudden stillness. He took a step towards Niyol, his spurs chinking. Hasteen, without a word, moved to stand between Flint and his Mustang. He didn't reach for the hunting knife at his belt, nor did his expression change from its usual stoic calm. Yet, there was an intensity in his presence, a silent warning that even a man like Flint couldn't entirely ignore. Flint's sneer deepened. "Indian pony, huh? Spirited looking. Too good for, well, you know." He let out a short, harsh laugh. His men chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. Hasteen's eyes, dark and unreadable, met Flint's. He said nothing. The air between them grew heavy, charged with a tension that prickled the skin. Niyol, sensing his master's stillness, stood firm, only the faintest tremor in his powerful muscles betraying any agitation. After a long moment, Flint shrugged, a gesture of contemptuous dismissal. Waste of good horseflesh. He turned and swaggered into the saloon, his men following like hyenas, trailing a lion. Hasteen remained for a moment, his gaze fixed on the bat-wing doors as they swung shut. His jaw was tight, his nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. He had seen the look in Flint's eyes. He had heard the unspoken challenge. The warrior within, the one who had sought solace in the quiet places, felt a cold premonition. The wind, rustling the dry leaves in the gutter, seemed to whisper of coming trouble. The presence of Flint's gang settled over Stoneford like a shroud. They didn't cause immediate, widespread chaos. Instead, it was a slow burn, a tightening knot of fear. A few days after their arrival, old Peterson, the mercantile owner, found his back window jimmied and a crate of expensive canned goods missing. He wrung his hands, his face pale. But he didn't dare accuse Flint's men, who lounged openly in the dusty spur, their laughter overly loud, their eyes daring anyone to challenge them. Then, a small rancher, a man named Abel Carter, who scratched a meager living from a few dozen head of cattle miles east of town, rode in, his face a mask of fury and despair. Half his herd, he reported to the town's aging, ineffective part-time marshal, had vanished overnight. Tracks led towards the broken country where Flint's men were rumored to have made a rough camp. The marshal, a man named Potter with a prominent belly and weary eyes, listened, nodded, and promised to look into it, a phrase everyone in Stoneford knew meant nothing would be done. Hasteen heard the whispers. He saw the fear etching itself deeper into the faces of the townsfolk. During a rare visit from an old kinsman, Kai, who lived with a few other Dine families further into the canyons, Hasteen spoke quietly of the new arrivals. "They are like coyotes with no fear of man," Hasteen said, his voice low. "They test the boundaries. Soon they will grow bolder." Kai, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and wisdom, nodded slowly. The scent of trouble is strong on the wind. Guard yourself, my nephew. And guard Niyol. Hasteen needed no such reminder. The way Flint had looked at his Mustang was seared into his memory. He began to take extra precautions. He moved his small camp deeper into the labyrinthine rock formations, choosing a spot accessible by only one narrow, easily watched trail. He spent more time reinforcing the hidden brush corral where Niyol spent his nights. His quiet demeanor in Stoneford, when he had to venture there for supplies, remained unchanged. But those who knew how to read the subtle signs, the way his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders, would have recognized a man on high alert. He was a hunter. And now, he was also the hunted, or at least, the potential target of those who preyed on others. He started to track Flint's gang, not directly confronting them, but observing from a distance, learning their habits, their numbers, the rhythm of their movements. He saw them riding out from their rough camp, always heavily armed, always with an air of arrogant menace. He noted the trails they favored, the times they were most active. His mind, sharp and analytical, filed away each detail. The warrior instincts, long dormant, were stirring, sharpening. A familiar coldness, the kind that preceded decisive action, settled in his gut. He was a man of peace. Yes, but peace was a luxury. The frontier rarely afforded for long. The days bled into a week. Then, too, Flint's gang grew more audacious. They rode through Stoneford with impunity, taking what they wanted from the shelves of the mercantile with only a sneer for payment, their horses shouldering aside anyone too slow to get out of their path. Marshal Potter made himself scarce, often finding urgent business at the opposite end of his small jurisdiction whenever Flint and his men were in town. The people of Stoneford lived under a cloud of simmering dread, their anger suppressed by a gnawing fear. Flint, it seemed, had not forgotten Niyol. On one of Hasteen's infrequent trips into the settlement, made only because his small store of coffee was exhausted, he saw Flint watching him from the porch of the dusty spur. Flint didn't speak, didn't make a gesture. He just watched. His eyes narrowed, that scarred grin fixed on his face. The message was clear. He was a patient man when it came to something he truly coveted. Hasteen knew the confrontation was inevitable. He could feel it building, like the pressure before a summer storm. He began to carry his old bow, freshly strung, and a quiver of iron-tipped arrows along with his hunting knife. It was a statement, subtle yet unmistakable, to anyone who understood the old ways. He was ready. The tipping point came on a clear, cool morning. Hasteen had ridden Niyol far out onto the plains, checking his trap lines for small game. It was a remote area, miles from Stoneford, miles from any other soul. The vast emptiness of the land usually brought him a sense of peace, but today, a prickling unease rode with him. As he rounded a cluster of weathered sandstone hoodoos, they were suddenly there, Flint and 3 of his men, materializing from the landscape as if conjured by the harsh sunlight. They had been waiting. "Well, well," Flint said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "Look what the wind blew in. We were just admiring the view, warrior, and your fine horse." His men fanned out, cutting off any easy escape. Hasteen's hand instinctively went to the knife at his belt. His eyes darted between the 4 men, assessing, calculating. Niyol, sensing the immediate danger, snorted and sidestepped, his muscles bunching. "Easy now," Flint said, raising a placating hand, though his eyes held no such sentiment. "We ain't looking for trouble with you. We just want the horse. A fair trade, I'd say. Your life. For the animal." Hasteen's face was a mask of cold fury. Niyol was not the animal. Niyol was his brother, his companion, a part of his very soul. To ask for him was to ask for a piece of his heart. "He is not for trade," Hasteen said, his voice low and steady, yet vibrating with barely suppressed rage. Flint chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Everything's for trade out here, warrior. Or for the taking. He gave a curt nod to his men. Take him! The next few moments were a blur of desperate action. Hasteen was a whirlwind of motion, his knife flashing. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, the years of suppressed warrior skill erupting to the surface. He managed to slash Gus across the arm, drawing a howl of pain, and sidestepped a clumsy lunge from another bandit. Niyol, too, fought, rearing and striking out with his powerful hooves, his shrill neighs tearing through the air. But they were outnumbered. A heavy blow from a pistol butt caught Hasteen on the side of the head, sending stars exploding behind his eyes. He staggered, his vision blurring. Another blow brought him to his knees. Through a haze of pain, he saw Flint approach Niyol, who was still fighting, kicking and biting at the men trying to grab his reins. Flint drew his pistol. There was a look of cold satisfaction on his face. "Stubborn animal," he snarled. Niyol, in a desperate attempt to reach his fallen master, lunged towards Hasteen. Flint raised his gun. "No." The word was ripped from Hasteen's throat, a raw cry of anguish. The shot echoed across the plains, unnaturally loud in the vast silence. Niyol screamed, a sound of pure agony, and stumbled. Another shot followed. The magnificent Mustang crumpled to the earth, his legs folding beneath him. He lay there, sides heaving, a dark pool spreading in the dust. Flint walked over to the fallen horse, a cruel smirk on his lips. He nudged Niyol with his boot. "Should have just given him up." He then turned to his men. "Tie the Indian up. Or just finish him. I don't care." He seemed to have lost interest, the prize he sought now ruined, but the act of destruction itself providing some perverse satisfaction. One of the bandits, a younger man with shifty eyes named Pike, kicked Hasteen viciously in the ribs. "Thought you were tough, huh?" Hasteen barely felt the blow. His entire being was focused on Niyol, whose breathing was becoming shallow, whose proud eyes were beginning to glaze over. He crawled, dragging himself through the dust, towards his friend. He reached Niyol's side just as a final, shuddering breath left the Mustang's body. The bandits, seeing Hasteen dazed and Niyol dead, mounted their horses. Flint gave one last look at the scene, his face impassive. "Waste of time," he muttered, then spurred his horse and rode off, his men following, their laughter drifting back on the wind. Hasteen didn't hear them go. He was kneeling in the dust, his hands stroking Niyol's still warm neck. The warrior paint on his face was now truly mixed with tears of profound grief, tears that burned like acid, and the grime of the uncaring earth. The world had gone silent, except for the ragged sound of his own breathing and the terrible aching emptiness where Niyol's spirit had been. The sun beat down, indifferent. The vast sky offered no comfort. There was only the dust, the blood, and a grief so profound it threatened to swallow him whole. He was left for dead, a broken man beside his slain companion. But as the hours passed and the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in colors of fire and blood, something else began to stir. Within Hasteen, the grief remained, a cold, hard stone in his chest. But alongside it, a different fire ignited, a fire of pure, unadulterated rage. The first stars pricked the darkening sky when Hasteen finally moved. His body ached from the beating. His head throbbed, but these pains were distant, insignificant compared to the gaping wound in his spirit. He rose, slowly, painfully, each movement an effort of will. He looked down at Niyol, his beloved friend, his shadow, his wind. There would be time for mourning, for the proper rites. But first, there was something else. With the care of a grieving father, he began to prepare Niyol for his final journey. He straightened the Mustang's limbs, smoothed his mane. He chanted softly, ancient words of passage, his voice hoarse and raw. Using his knife and his bare hands, he dug into the hard earth, a shallow grave, but one made with reverence. It took hours, under the cold light of the moon. When it was done, he covered Niyol with stones, creating a cairn to mark his resting place, to protect him from scavengers. Then, Hasteen walked, not towards Stoneford, not towards his own hidden camp. He walked towards a place he had not visited in many years, a place sacred and secret, a place where he had, long ago, buried a part of himself. He moved with a new purpose, a terrifying resolve hardening his grief-stricken features. He reached it as the false dawn was painting the eastern sky with pale light. A small, hidden cave, its entrance obscured by a fall of rock and ancient, gnarled juniper. He moved the stones aside, his movements economical and precise, revealing a dark opening. Inside, wrapped in carefully preserved hides, was his past. Not just weapons, though they were there. His war bow, stronger and heavier than his hunting bow, a quiver of arrows fletched with hawk feathers and tipped with razor-sharp obsidian, a lance adorned with symbols of his clan, and a heavy war club. But there were also other things. Sacred bundles, paint pots containing the colors of war, symbols of a path he had once walked, a path of the warrior, a path he had thought to leave behind forever in pursuit of a quiet life. He stripped to the waist, his lean, scarred torso gleaming faintly in the dim light. He painted himself, not with the symbols of mourning, but with the ancient markings of a man on the vengeance trail. His face became a mask of stark, terrifying resolve. The grief was still there, a cold fire in his eyes, but now it was channeled, focused into a single, deadly point. As he emerged from the cave, armed and adorned for war, a figure stumbled out of the pre-dawn gloom. Hasteen tensed, his hand instantly going to the war club at his side. The figure was young, disheveled, his face pale and drawn in the faint light. He wore the rough clothes of a rider, but his gun belt was missing. "Wait," the young man stammered, holding up his hands, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperation. I mean you no harm." Hasteen recognized him. It was Billy, the youngest of Flint's gang, the one who hadn't seemed to share the others' overt cruelty, though he had been present at Niyol's killing. Hasteen's eyes narrowed. He remained silent, a formidable, threatening presence. "My name's Billy," the young man continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I was with Flint." He swallowed hard. What he did to your horse, it wasn't right." "Flint." He shot him again after he was already down, just for the spite of it, laughed while he did it. Billy's face was etched with shame and a lingering horror. "I couldn't stomach it no more. I left them last night, took my chance, when the others were asleep." Hasteen watched him, his expression unreadable. A deserter, a witness, perhaps something more. "They're headed for the old San Esteban mission," Billy blurted out, as if the words were desperate to escape. "Up in the Blackwood Hills. They aimed a hole up there, divide the loot they've gathered. Flint," he mentioned it, said it was remote enough, defensible. Hasteen's gaze remained intense. He still said nothing. Billy shifted nervously. "Look, I know you've got no reason to trust me, but I had to tell you. And there's something else, something you should know about Flint." He hesitated, then leaned in conspiratorially. "He's scared of fire, terrified of it. Saw his family's cabin burned down when he was just a boy, they say. He doesn't talk about it, but I've seen him. Seen how he gets when the campfire gets too big, or when lightning strikes close. He freezes up, can't think straight. Fire. Hasteen considered this. The San Esteban mission. He knew of it. A crumbling ruin. A place of ghosts and shadows. A fitting place for what was to come. Billy's information, if true, was a weapon. A powerful one. Hasteen finally spoke. His voice a low rumble, like distant thunder. "Why do you tell me this?" Billy looked down at his boots, then back up. His eyes meeting Hasteen's with a flicker of desperate sincerity. Maybe I'm looking for some kind of atonement. Maybe I just don't want to be part of that anymore. What they did to your horse, it was just too much." He paused. He was a fine animal. Hasteen looked at the young man for a long moment. He saw fear, yes, but also a glimmer of something genuine. Perhaps a soul not entirely lost. He gave a curt nod. "Go then. Ride west. Do not look back. If you are seen in this territory again by me, your life is forfeit." Billy's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you," he whispered. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then turned and scrambled away into the rocks, disappearing as quickly as he had come. Hasteen watched him go. Then he turned his gaze towards the Blackwood Hills, now faintly visible in the growing light. The San Esteban mission. Flint's fear of fire. The pieces were falling into place. The spirit of Niyol cried out for justice. And Hasteen, the warrior reborn from grief and rage, would deliver it. The sun climbed higher, baking the already parched land. Hasteen moved like a phantom through the broken country, his pace tireless, his senses heightened. He was no longer just a man. He was an extension of the land itself, a spirit of vengeance given form. He carried Niyol's memory in his heart, a burning coal that fueled his every step. He reached the foothills of the Blackwood Hills by late afternoon. The air grew cooler here, the scent of pine replacing the dry dust of the plains. He found their trail easily, the tracks of 4 horses, shod and heavy laden. Flint was confident, careless even, not expecting pursuit, certainly not from the man he'd left for dead. As dusk began to settle, casting long, eerie shadows among the trees, Hasteen saw the crumbling bell tower of the San Esteban mission silhouetted against the blood-red sky. It stood on a small rise, surrounded by decaying adobe walls, a forgotten relic of a bygone era. A thin tendril of smoke curled upwards from within the ruins, a cook fire. Hasteen didn't approach directly. He circled, silent as a hunting owl, using the cover of the twilight and the dense undergrowth. He observed the layout of the mission, the gaps in the crumbling walls, the areas of deep shadow. He saw 2 men outside. Gus, the one he'd wounded, his arm now bandaged, and Pike, the one who had kicked him. They were tending to the horses, their movements lax, their conversation desultory. Flint and the 4th man, a wiry individual with shifty eyes named Cale, were presumably inside. Hasteen chose his first target. Pike. He was younger, more jittery. Hasteen knocked an arrow, the obsidian tip gleaming faintly. He drew the powerful war bow, his muscles sure and steady. The arrow flew, a silent whisper of death. It struck Pike in the throat. The young bandit gasped, his eyes wide with shock and sudden agony, his hands clawing at the shaft. He stumbled a few steps and fell, gurgling, into the dust. Gus, startled by the sudden, choked cry, spun around. "Pike? What in the—" He saw Pike on the ground, the arrow protruding from his neck. His eyes widened in terror. He fumbled for his pistol, but before he could draw it, another arrow slammed into his chest, piercing through his good shoulder and lung. He coughed, a spray of blood, and sank to his knees, his pistol clattering to the ground. He stared, uncomprehending, into the deepening shadows from where the arrow had come. Hasteen moved, swift and silent, from the tree line into the mission compound. He retrieved his arrows, his face grim, 2 down. Inside the main mission building, a partially collapsed chapel, Flint and Cale heard Gus's choked cry. "What was that?" Cale asked, his hand instinctively going to his gun. Flint, who had been sorting through a pile of stolen goods, grunted. "Probably Gus being clumsy. Go check." Cale hesitated, peering out into the gloom. "Don't like this, Flint. Too quiet." "Just go!" Flint snarled, his patience wearing thin. Cale crept towards the doorway, pistol drawn. He peered out. He saw Pike's body, then Gus, slumped against a crumbling wall, clearly dead. His blood ran cold. "Flint, we got trouble. Big trouble. Pike and Gus are—" He never finished the sentence. Hasteens' war club swung with devastating force. Connected with the side of Cale's head, there was a sickening crunch, and Cale dropped like a stone, his pistol skittering across the dusty floor. Flint, hearing the thud, jumped to his feet, his own gun now in his hand. "Cale? What's going on out there?" He moved cautiously towards the doorway, his eyes straining in the dim light. He saw Cale's unmoving form. Then, from the deepest shadows of the ruined chapel, a figure emerged. It was Hasteen, painted, armed, his eyes burning with a cold, implacable fury. He looked like a demon conjured from the very earth. Flint recoiled, his scarred face paling. You're supposed to be dead. You killed Niyol," Hasteen said, his voice soft, yet carrying the weight of an avalanche. "You took him from me. It was just a horse, damn you." Flint spat, trying to regain his composure, but there was a tremor in his voice. He raised his pistol. Hasteen was faster. His lance, held low, darted forward like a striking snake. The razor-sharp point caught Flint in the gun arm. Flint roared in pain, his pistol clattering away. He clutched his bleeding arm, his eyes wide with a mixture of agony and growing terror. "Now we talk about fire," Hasteen said, his voice still chillingly calm. He had prepared. While stalking the mission, he had gathered dry tinder and small branches. Now, he kicked some of these into the dying embers of their cook fire, which was situated near a pile of old, dry timbers stacked against one of the interior walls, remnants of a collapsed roof. With a few quick, expert movements, he fanned the embers, and a small flame flickered to life. He added more tinder. The flames grew, licking at the dry timbers. Flint watched, his eyes darting from Hasteen to the growing fire, then back again. A new kind of fear began to dawn on his face, a deeper, more primal terror than just the fear of Hasteen's weapons. "What? What are you doing?" "Your friend Billy told me of your dislike for fire," Hasteen said, his lips curling into a grim, almost predatory smile. The flames were catching now, spreading quickly up the dry timbers, casting, dancing, demonic shadows on the crumbling adobe walls. Smoke began to fill the enclosed space. Flint's bravado shattered. His face, already pale, turned ashen. His breath came in ragged gasps. "No! Stay away from me! Keep that fire away!" He stumbled backwards, away from the growing conflagration, his eyes fixed on the flames with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. He seemed to shrink, the ruthless gang leader replaced by a terrified child. Hasteen advanced slowly, his lance still ready, boxing Flint in between himself and the rapidly spreading fire. The heat was becoming intense. Sparks flew. The crackle of burning wood filled the air, along with Flint's whimpering cries. "You took my companion," Hasteen said, his voice cutting through the roar of the flames. "You left him to die in the dust. You laughed." I'm sorry," Flint babbled, tears streaming down his face, mingling with sweat and grime. "I'll give you anything, Gold, anything. Just put out the fire, please." He was shaking uncontrollably, his eyes darting wildly, a trapped animal. Hasteen showed no mercy. This was not about gold. This was about justice. This was for Niyol. He cornered Flint against a wall where the flames were now raging. The heat was unbearable. Flint screamed, a high, thin sound, shielding his face with his good arm. He finally broke, dropping to his knees, sobbing and pleading incoherently. Hasteen stood over him, a figure of righteous judgment silhouetted against the inferno. He did not need to strike again with a weapon of steel or stone. The fire, and Flint's own terror, had defeated him. He left Flint there, a gibbering, broken wreck, to face the heat and smoke, and the ghosts of his own brutal deeds. The flames would not kill him. Hasteen knew. They were contained enough by the adobe. But his mind, already shattered by fear, would be its own prison. Hasteen turned and walked out of the burning chapel, into the cool night air. He didn't look back. The screams and the crackling flames were Niyol's funeral pyre, and the end of Marcus Flint's reign of terror. Justice had been served, not in the quick stroke of a blade, but in the consuming fear that mirrored the coldness Flint had shown to others. The first light of dawn was streaking the sky when Hasteen rode slowly into Stoneford. He wasn't riding Niyol, but one of the bandits' horses, laden with some of the goods they had stolen from the townsfolk and Abel Carter's ranch. He led another horse carrying the rest. He himself was still adorned in his warrior paint, his expression somber, his eyes reflecting the exhaustion of his ordeal, but also a grim, hard-won peace. The town was just beginning to stir. The blacksmith, old Peterson, Marshal Potter, they stopped and stared as Hasteen rode down the main street. There was fear in their eyes, yes, at this apparition of a vengeful Navajo warrior. But there was also a dawning awareness. Hasteen dismounted in front of the marshal's office. He said nothing, merely gestured to the laden horses. Marshal Potter, his face a mixture of apprehension and awe, slowly approached. He looked at the brands on some of the recovered tools, the familiar markings on a saddle. He looked at Hasteen, at the fresh bloodstains on his leggings, the implacable look in his eyes. Flint? And his gang? Potter finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. Hasteen nodded once. They will trouble you no more. Word spread through Stoneford like wildfire. The fear of Hasteen began to be replaced by a reluctant gratitude, then outright relief. Abel Carter, his face lighting up with disbelief and joy, identified his stolen saddles and gear. Peterson found his missing crate of goods. The dark cloud that had hung over Stoneford had lifted. Hasteen did not stay for their thanks. He took only what was his by right of Niyol's memory. Flint's silver-chased saddle, a reminder of the price of arrogance, and a good, strong packhorse. He declined offers of money or reward. His payment had already been exacted. He saw Billy on the edge of town, looking hesitant. The young man had clearly waited. Hasteen met his gaze, and Billy seemed to understand. He gave a slight, respectful nod, then turned and walked away, heading west, towards a new life, perhaps a better one. Hasteen watched him go, a flicker of something unreadable in his own eyes. Then Hasteen mounted the packhorse and rode out, heading back towards the high country, towards the silence and the solitude. He carried with him the enduring ache of Niyol's absence, a wound that would never fully heal. But beside that ache, there was also a quiet sense of peace. Justice had been done. Niyol's spirit could now run free, unburdened. The people of Stoneford would whisper his name for years to come, a legend born of dust and fire. They would speak of the quiet Navajo and his magnificent Mustang, and the terrible fury that was unleashed when that bond was broken. The wind, too, would carry the tale through the canyons and across the plains. The land remembered. It remembered Niyol, and it remembered Hasteen, the warrior who rode the vengeance trail, and found a measure of peace in the heart of the storm. His journey was over, But the echoes of his fury and his deep love for his slain companion would linger forever on the dusty trails of the untamed West.